what kind of job you were doing there for BBC Learning English?
It was a fantastic place to work. I did 4.5 years there in a department called BBC Learning English. And interestingly, I did them very much what I'm sort of doing now, but I'm doing my own thing. So now I could have done this in the introduction, couldn't I? Like got to 51 minutes in, who knows?
Welcome to English with Lewis. Let's go!
Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, and welcome back to English with Lewis and my native English conversations with real teachers that I'm sure you recognize. And today we have the privilege of welcoming another wonderful guest who's smirking a little bit, he's laughing a little bit, he's grinning a little bit. Roy, what's going on? What are you laughing at?
It was the word privilege. I thought, gosh, privilege. If you feel privileged, I'm honoured to be here. So yeah, my name is Roy Woodhouse, and hello, good morning,
hello,
good evening, good night, whatever you said.
So yeah, it is a privilege to have you on the podcast YouTube channel. It's always nice to connect with other teachers, and we were having a little bit of a chit chat, a bit of a natter on before I pressed record. And we're going to continue basically talking about random stuff. And you very, very, very briefly introduced yourself and said your name is Roy Woodhouse. But tell us a little bit more about you. Who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? And so on and so forth.
Okay, so yeah, as I say, my name is Roy Woodhouse. I was born in a city in the middle of England called Nottingham. And I grew up for the first 6 years of my life in a place called Derby. Derbyshire, actually, technically. It was a town called Ilkeston. And then at 6 years old, my parents decided to sort of make the great move down south. And we moved to the Isle of Wight, which is an incredible little island off the south coast. And when I got here, so originally I came here with a very broad Derbyshire accent. And it's a lovely accent, but I came here and you know what kids are like. Kids can be cruel. And I went to school and they were all like sort of mimicking my accent. And when I went home one day and I said, Mum, please help me. I need to change my accent to sound more like somebody from the Isle of Wight. And she sent me for like kind of lessons with this wonderful traditional, born at the tail end of the Victorian period teacher. She was very strict, very serious. And she taught me lots of things. And I ended up with a sort of modern RP accent rather than the local Isle of Wight accent, which is quite ironic. And then, yeah, beyond then, I kind of sort of moved around the country. I ended up in Leeds. I went to Leeds University. I studied acting and an elective in creative writing at a place called Bretton Hall. Which was phenomenal. But yeah, after that, I kind of dipped in and dipped out of kind of jobs and careers, trying to find out what I really wanted to do. I did a bit of acting, did a bit of cooking, chefing, and lots of different things. Never really found my feet. And then at the age of about 28, 29, I had a girlfriend at the time, and she asked me questions about the English language. I'm sure you've been there and got asked questions about the English language, and there were questions that I knew the answers to, but I didn't know why. So I knew that it was the present perfect was have been, for example, but I didn't quite understand why these things were. I could get into the fight. Anyway, it frustrated me, and I started to sort of research and kind of look into the forms and look into X, Y, and Z, and I actually discovered I really enjoyed helping people with English and teaching English, and language has always been a fundamental part of my life. And yeah, so I became a teacher, moved around, ended up teaching in some really cool schools in London, like St. Giles, and then I worked in Stafford House in Cambridge later on. And then I met my wife in a pub, classic story, in London. My wife is from Brazil. And we started dating at distance. There was a day that I was here, she was there, and I looked out onto this kind of rainy London backdrop, and I thought, you know what the hell, let's do it. So we kind of ended up moving together to Brazil. We got married, and yeah, 3 years of Brazil, moved back to the UK, worked with the BBC, and here I am now. I don't know, that's a longer probably introduction than you needed, right?
No. It's funny because I recorded a similar conversation like this a few weeks ago, and after a really complete introduction, I was like, okay, thanks. We might as well just finish now.
No, I've got much more. I've got far more to say. As they say, I can talk a hind legs off a donkey, so we're good.
Lovely. Nice expression, to talk the hind legs off a donkey. Could you break it down for us? What does this mean?
So the hind legs are the back legs, and a donkey is a kind of a little horse. Let's go with that way. Also known as an ass. I'm not entirely sure on the difference between donkeys and asses, but there we go.
It's the same, but yeah, I don't know why we have the two words.
Yeah, I think probably one's Latin-esque and one's, Scandinavian potentially. And it's basically like to talk endlessly, to talk, a large amount. That's what this idiom means, because of course idioms are very, they don't really rely on donkeys. There's no donkeys involved in our conversation. There's no hind legs coming off, but it's basically, I'd love to know where that idiom came from. That's going to be my mission immediately after this call. I'm going to find out the
etymology. You can make a video on it. You can be like, I was just having a call with someone and I was talking the hind legs off a donkey. We could also say to talk for England as well.
Yes.
If someone talks for England, they speak so much, they natter on all the time. And just breaking down, again, a couple of advanced words that you used. To break down, phrasal verb is to divide and explain. And you said that you were researching or investigating and used a nice phrasal verb, which was to look into. So I was looking into jobs in Brazil, for example. But let's go over some of these interesting things, because you've mentioned so many things, and let's get into detail. So first things first, a Derbyshire accent. I don't really know how to explain it to people, because it's not a very deep accent, in my opinion. It's quite neutral, I'd say. Is it not?
To an extent, I would say I can tell it a mile off. There's another wonderful expression. I can see it, I can see it a long way away. So Nottinghamshire, Derbyshire, and Lincolnshire accents, they're different, but they're quite similar. And the other day I was in a pub with my wife. We took my son for pizza, as he seems to be the only thing he eats. And there was a gentleman there, and he spoke to me, and I was like, "Where are you from?" And he was like, "Nottinghamshire." I was like, "I thought I recognised that accent." And he was like, "Was it that terrible Nottinghamshire accent?" And I was like, "Actually, that accent sounds a bit more like home to me." And because I didn't want him to think that I was, and I was like, that was amazing. So it's slightly more the Derbyshire accent. I mean, there's a lot of kind of colloquialisms, like regional things, especially from Ilkeston. They'll say things like "Hey up me dog," which is like another way of saying hello. "Hey up me dog," and "gel" instead of girl. And my father's from Nottinghamshire. My mother's from Derbyshire as well. And my father will pronounce water as watter. I know. I don't know if it's a him thing.
The typical phrase of like, "Can I have a bottle of water?" He would say, "Can I have a bottle of water?" Can I a
bottle of water?
Can I a bottle of water?
Sometimes he does say he says water as well, but it'll be more water sometimes. So he calls beer canal water, which is sort of canal water. He's calling it like dirty water. But he's got it. I think he's got his own sort of things as well. But the Derbyshire accent, I mean, it's a bit more like that. So it's a bit more kind of like, it's got a kind of nicer, kind of warming. So I feel it sounds like home to me. So yeah, it's slightly different. Of course, some of the vowel sounds are different. We have in the accent that I have, we have the accent. They'll have a more of a accent. So they'll say cup or mug, and I'll say mug and cup. But yeah, it's slightly more neutralizing. But my father, he gets mistaken for being from Yorkshire because his accent's quite strong. But when I came down to the Isle of Wight, I had this sort of broad Derbyshire accent, be like, "Hey, you're right. Sing like that hard." And that's the word that they would really kind of, those sort of words and certain vowels.
Did they really pick on you at school? Did they really bully you at school for having like a northern accent?
No, not bullying. I think it's more teasing. And I think as a kid, you more want to blend in, don't you? I mean, we're talking like 6 or 7 years old. It's not a constructive, there was no kind of xenophobia going off. They didn't really realize that I was from they just knew my accent was different. And they probably thought I was from the Isle of Wight, but I had a weird accent. And so there was no malice involved. But it's more general teasing. Nobody wants to feel. I think as we get older, we want to be more individual. But as a child, we just want to kind of
Yeah,
be
you
with
just want to blend in, as you say. You
yeah,
just want to fit in and kind of camouflage and be accepted in that group. And then you said that you had a teacher who was teaching you how to speak the perfect Queen's English, the RP
yeah,
accent, which is funny because I wasn't like aware of how this was taught until I started my first English teaching job in Seville. And I remember
yeah,
they had some of the classes which were completely focused on pronunciation. And I had to change my accent in order to teach people the RP accent, in
yeah,
particular with words like sun, country. It'd always be that sound
yeah.
instead of the it's sunny, the country, which would be more from the north and Yorkshire and Derbyshire as well. But then in the RP accent, you have this ah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no such thing as a right and a wrong answer, an accent. Sorry. So this is the first thing I always say to my students. So, a student came to me the other day and said, "I want to learn the Liverpool accent, the Scouse accent." I was like, "Fantastic!" But what you need to do is find a teacher from there who has that accent. And I agree with you. I think there's certain things like the phonemic. Well, the dictionaries, Cambridge, Oxford, they are predominantly relying, and sometimes they fall short. If I'm totally honest, the dictionaries, but they're relying on a modern RP accent or even somewhat traditional for some of them. And that forces, I think, some teachers to try and teach a modern RP accent, even though they don't necessarily use the vowel sounds. And I have my own opinions on that. I think, like, at the end of the day, you should teach in your accent. And I think it could be quite tricky. But so, yeah, my teacher at that time was a sort of traditional RP speaker. So she would say things like orphan and tour rather than tour and often. And language has moved on. So I teach with a modern British RP accent. It's a modern one, so it's slightly different. I mean, there's glottalization on the end of sound, so it might say got home rather than got home. I think it's home. And like the vowels are changing as sounds are changing. You only need to look at the last 50 years, probably even the last 40 years. Look at the way at which Prince Charles or King Charles, sorry, gosh, speaks versus his children. There's a different shift. There's a definite shift in the vowels between their way of speaking. And yeah, so this teacher she taught me predominantly through poetry and prose. So I would do lots of kind of festivals where I would get up on stage and perform. And I was very young. And ironically enough, I'm naturally quite, I find it quite sort of, I get quite nervous before I go on stage. But it's the adrenaline that I thrive on. So actually, I used to love doing drama. I used to love and hate doing drama, acting. I used to do all this kind of theatre, which is why I ended up in studying acting at university. But I would get really nervous before I got on stage to the point where I'd practically be panicking, nearly vomiting. And as soon as I went on stage, I'd be like, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hello." And it was I don't know if you ever had that experience. The first couple of times you teach a class, it's like, it's terrifying before you're about to go into 20 people, 30 people sometimes, and you're about to go, and this is how English is. And this is, and you're like, oh my God, what, and you have this crisis. And after about 5, 7, 10 years of doing it, it becomes second nature to stand in front of 30 people and talk whatever you're going to.
No. It's interesting. Like, I can definitely relate to it. And before continuing, there are a couple of things that I'd like to go over. You said you thrive on it. So you thrive on that pressure or on that moment of people like watching you. To thrive on something is to enjoy and do something well. So if you are thriving, you are living your best life. You're really performing well. And there was another phrase you used, and it's completely slipped my mind. I've completely forgotten what you said, but it was a nice expression. If anyone heard it and they think they can read my mind, let me know in the comments, and we'd be happy to break it down for you. But I'd like to ask you more about if you had any techniques for kind of getting over this, maybe imposter syndrome or the nerves, getting clammy hands, or maybe getting a bit red and sweaty before teaching or acting. Like, did you have any techniques to overcome this?
Yeah, I think breathing is my I talk about this a
Staying
lot.
alive is always good.
Yeah, yeah. Oxygen is really important, I found. So I mean, I teach a bunch of I've taught a bunch of people how to make sort of how to give presentations, and I worked with a bunch of doctors out in Brazil, um, and some of them would say, "Do you know what I'm talking about?" And I'd be like, "Not exactly, but that's your job to explain to me what I want you to do." And the first thing I would always say is breathing, because what a lot of people do, particularly, I mean, we're talking not only just about going up on stage and things like that. If your lungs aren't full of air, you get this automatic nervous quality where it comes out, and it's like if you're running, you're struggling for breath. You go in and you're doing that. But if you compose and bring in that kind of breath right at the start, pausing as well is massively important. Not being afraid to take a pause. So I find, and this is sort of bleeding into students rather than my own experience of that. But do you find that some students will talk at like incredible speed because it makes them sound more fluent? And I always say there is a power in pause, like just giving that moment to just reflect or allow the audience to reflect. So yeah, for me, getting over that was all about breathing. It was just breathe, compose. Let's teach a point. Of course, you needed to know what you were going to talk about. You needed to, I remember when I first started teaching, I'd be there nights before with grammar books, heavy in my grammar, trying to work out little things like, oh, okay, so I could teach it this way. And of course, you need to know your subject. You can't just breathe and hope for the best. You need to know what you're talking about. So yeah, plenty of study was being prepared. Of course, is important, but breathing as well, just to get over that moment and realizing that they're just human beings that want you to give them you give them your knowledge. I always said if you could take a USB stick, stick it in your mind, draw it out, charge you a bit of money, and here you go, take your English. Sadly, it doesn't work like that.
Take my knowledge.
Yes, take everything. Oh God, it's awful in there,
And you highlighted the power of pause, which I think is quite interesting, in particular for presentations. It's very natural to use lots of fillers, like etc. And this is not a problem if you do it, but if you are giving a speech or a presentation, it's important to just take a moment, breathe in, breathe out, and that'll allow you the time to remember what you want to say, or maybe say it in a slightly better way than just repeating like, which is natural. But if you're speaking in front of an audience, it does give away the fact that you are a little bit nervous, and then people might start to question your knowledge and think that this person maybe isn't the person I thought they were. And I don't want a USB of their knowledge.
Load of ums. I think as well, though, it in a natural flowing conversation, it's when you're sometimes searching for a word. And that's not necessarily the cardinal sin, but in a presentation, it can be. And I always talk to my students about this and say, if you've got a doctor and they come into the room and there's about to be some surgery, I don't know, and they come in and they're like, okay, so the surgery's on your right arm, we're going to do this, bum, bum, bum. Do you have any questions? You feel confident. You feel like this guy knows what he's doing. But if they come in and go, so we got a bit of surgery today. It's on the left arm. Is it on the? I don't know. I've never done this before. You're not going to let that person get a knife anywhere near you, a scalpel anywhere near you. And it's the same I say with presentations. If you just compose yourself, you're gonna look like you should be there, and you do deserve to be there. That's the thing as well. Confidence is key. It's everything. I teach pronunciation, as we touched on, and having the confidence in the sounds that you're making is key. If you know where you're putting your mouth, where you're positioning your tongue, everything like that, if you know what you're doing, then you have that confidence that suddenly you think, okay, so I'm making the sound, I'm doing the sounds right, I'm making this correct position of my mouth. Now I can do that. Now I can practice that. Now I can repeat, shadow, do whatever you do. And suddenly it goes to a level where they actually become more confident in themselves. Whereas if you're not entirely sure whether it's like that or it's more like, I don't know. So one thing I sometimes teach is the difference between if I put my mouth in the correct position and the wrong position. So I make a complete fool of myself. I've got no problem with that. Gosh, I was going to do the sound there. So if you do the let's do the R. So this is an interesting one. So R, and it's down south. I would say it's probably slightly more sort of an open vowel sound. So we have this word car. Let's go for car. So it's nice and open. I call it the dentist vowel because you're like open your mouth. And my wife recently said something, and she said, as I said, she's from Brazil, and she said, "Oh, let's go and get the car." And I was like, "Cool." And she said, "Am I saying that word correctly?" Now, with marriage, it's slightly different, I'm not going to sit there and go, "Need to tweak that." Only if there's a major pronunciation blunder. There's a good word for it. You can pick that one up. Blunder. Or something goes really goes wrong, will I sort of help her with it? And if she asks me, because otherwise it becomes a teacher-student relationship. Weird. So she said, "Am I saying that right?" And I said, "Well, no." And she was saying rather than So her mouth wasn't open, her tongue was up there, and her position of the mouth was wrong. It sounded roundabout, like, "I'm going to get the car." And so we worked on it. We opened the mouth, we did it, and she's now pronouncing it, and she loves it. She finds it fantastic. And it's the same thing. Like, some vowel sounds may sound, there's certain ones that are quite. So the vowels in the north are slightly different to the vowels in south.
Yeah.
Okay? You've only got to listen to the wonderful interviews with Liam Gallagher recently to hear how different vowel sounds can be. And there's nothing wrong with having any accent, which is what I draw back on. Every accent is correct. They're all accent. But if you mix the accents, that's a problem as well. So if you've got a few, if I'm suddenly talking, like the other day I was walking down the street and then suddenly I go, and I decided to get a lovely cup of tea. You're like, "Oh, hello. Where did that come from?" It breaks you out of the reality. And that's one thing that I would say as well.
Like, personally in my classes, I don't often focus that much on pronunciation. It's something that for me comes with the classes, but mainly I would stick to advanced vocabulary, phrasal verbs, idioms. You mentioned the word blunder, and a blunder is like a mistake, essentially. But it's interesting. I might start focusing on pronunciation more because it seems like it's something that a lot of students are always asking for. And there is a demand for people to learn how to get rid of their accent to a certain extent. So it always seems like people want to learn how to speak like, example, the Queen, whatever.
Probably more of a modern accent, because the Queen's accent changed even through her lifetime. If you listen to sort of recordings of the Queen at the start of her reign towards the end of the reign, there's a huge difference. I mean, she had that wonderful "off" kind of noise as well, always instead of "off."
Mama.
But she had a beautiful way. So I loved the way that the Queen spoke, and it was a kind of time capsule in terms of accent. But she did change it over time. And I think that was to maintain sort of an attempt of relevance in terms of accent, to communicate with the sort of the way the world changed.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. Sorry, Karen.
No, it's interesting. I was going to ask you another question because, of course, you studied acting in Leeds. Would you say that teaching and acting are quite similar?
Yeah. Yes and no. But I think that there are a lot of similarities. You have to put you can't show everything of your personality. You can't bring your thing to work. Of course, you know this. We have lives, we have dogs, we have husbands, we have wives, we have God knows what going on in our life. You cannot bring that to the classroom. So you need to put your best self forward, if you like, every time you go in a classroom. So there is an element of masking what's going on in your life. I think with any job as well. And of course, that idea of being the center of attention, the center of focus, some people love it, some people don't. I think if you're a teacher, you've got to somewhat feel comfortable being a focal point.
Yeah.
But there are some similarities, I suppose, in terms of being able to, one thing that can
using your voice, I guess, and pronunciation in particular. In your case, if you're used to changing the way that you speak for certain roles, then you're learning the lines, and then you are in front of people. I guess being an actor, I think, is an advantage if you later become a teacher, because you're already used to a lot of the things that you would do as a teacher. And there are a lot of transferable skills of basically using your voice and knowing how to make the most of speech, essentially.
Well, as well, though, think about the accent thing. So you see these actors, some actors can really change their accent and others struggle. And I think there is an element.
Neeson.
Liam Neeson's incredible. Sean Bean, not far down the road from you, is South Yorkshire and everything he does. And there's I don't know how true this is, but there's a wonderful story that Game of Thrones, the House of Winterfell, I don't know, wherever he's from, Starks. They were meant to have a certain accent, and because of his accent, they had to change and all adapt. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's a wonderful story, whether it is or not. But like everything he's in, he's got this wonderful South Yorkshire accent. I think even Sharp, he played Sharp, of course, and the character of Sharp, I think originally was meant to be from London, but they changed it, they rewrote it to, I don't know whether these stories are just around the kind of mythology of Sean Bean. But you're right, but other actors, they really can change their accents. And I would say that they tap into this idea of kind of being able to analyze, adapt, and kind of this idea of seeing how an accent is different, drawing on certain sounds, and their brains are using things like neuroplasticity to kind of really adapt, create neural pathways within their brains to be able to adapt and access certain sounds. So, I mean, look at somebody like Ewan McGregor. Ewan McGregor is from Edinburgh, I believe. Yeah. And when he does his interviews, he's got this wonderful kind of Scottish accent. So he's talking like that, and he's got this kind of different kind of voice. And then he, of course, did Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yeah. A lot of people remember, from my generation, they'll remember Alec Guinness doing Obi-Wan Kenobi. You know, now that's a voice I haven't heard in a long, no, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. He had this wonderful kind of accent. And if you analyze Alec Guinness's accent from the original Star Wars, he's actually a bit transatlantic, if you like. He's not an RP accent. He spoke with an RP accent as an actor, as a person in interviews. But in the role of Obi-Wan, his vowels are slightly different. Hello, oh. It's not oh as it was at the time. And when Ewan did the role in, episode 1 and 2, Phantom Menace and all that, his original accent was really sort of traditional RP. There's a line here, the classic line is, hello there. And he says, hello there. And if you listen to Alec Guinness, it's more, hello there, rather than hello. And there's a different vowel. And then later on, when he did the TV show as Obi-Wan, I can't believe I'm talking about Star Wars, but never mind.
You're really
he changed
it in on it as well.
I know. He changed back to Alec Guinness's kind of accent. If you watch the later versions.
Yeah, I have. I didn't clock and realize the change in accent, but of course, like, he is Scottish with a delicate Scottish accent that you did a very good impression of.
Thank you.
He'll easily switch to like an American accent. Like, I watched The Island recently as well. And
good.
I was watching it in Spanish, I think, with my girlfriend, and she hadn't watched it in English. And then when you have the real person who is actually Scottish with Ewan McGregor's accent, who is like the millionaire who then hired this place to then make a double of him. And then the double speaks with an American accent and the real person speaks with a Scottish accent. And then if you're watching it dubbed, you can't notice this difference. So then if you've got the two of them speaking to each other, it's as if they are the same person, but then the difference is just the Scottish accent. So
he's an incredible actor, and there's a lot of actors that can tie into that. And I mean, a good example, Andrew Lincoln played Rick Grimes in The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
So most of the time he had a really good Georgian, what we would perceive. That's the ironic thing. Probably for an American, they could spot it more easily. Like, if somebody comes across and does a Leeds accent, you're probably going to draw in and go, whoa, that was a bit wrong. Some general English accent, occasionally you'll hear a word that an American actor will say, and you suddenly go, oh, no. Okay, they're American. Because there'll be a certain vowel sound that's slightly different. There'll be a certain word. But Andrew Lincoln was in The Walking Dead. For me, he's had a really solid, really good sort of American accent, Georgian accent. But apparently his pronunciation of his son's name, which is quite important, his son is called Carl. He was saying there's a lot of memes on the internet about his pronunciation of that because it sounds more like coral for an American. He's like, Carl. And, you got all these kind of memes saying coral. I thought it sounded really good, but apparently, of course, maybe if you're from Georgia, you're going to go, that's not how I would say.
That's where you'll pick up on the little subtleties. You'll notice and realize these little delicate nuances and subtleties. But continuing with accents, the BBC were previously always known for hiring people who always had the Queen's English, the RP accent, which has changed in the last decade or so, I'd say, where there's clearly been some kind of policy internally to try and represent people from different areas of the UK a lot more. So then people who are watching the news on the BBC will be able to notice that you won't just have an RP accent. You might have a Mancunian accent. You might have Scousers. You might have Geordies, Scots, Irish people, etc. But tying in to your previous experience working at the BBC, could you tell us a little bit about this experience and how it was and what kind of job you were doing there for BBC Learning English?
It was a fantastic place to work. I did 4.5 years there in a department called BBC Learning English. And interestingly, I did them very much what I'm sort of doing now, but I'm doing my own thing. So now I could have done this in the introduction, couldn't I? So I got to 51 minutes in, who knows?
Hopefully people have got to this part of the chat.
they finally go, who is this man? So, I'm now doing something called English Right Now, which is basically just creating English learning content for English learners around the world. And I was doing the similar sort of thing for the BBC. There were podcasts. There were sort of like these English lessons based on the news called News Review. There was, lots of different podcasts like The English We Speak and things like that. And it was different parts. So The English We Speak focused on sort of slang expressions, and whereas News Review focused on words that were trending in the news, and 6-minute English. There were lots of different things going on, like both recorded and things. So you can still see me on their website and places, their YouTube channel. Yeah. Still, it's a bit back in time now. It's probably about 1.5 years ago, but it was a great place to work. I think the fundamental thing is there were lots of great training, lots of great minds, all sort of working together, and the collaborative effort is great. And it was a great experience. So I'm pretty much doing a very similar thing now in terms of I'm working with English and making things, but of course I'm doing my own thing that's not really related to the news and things like this. It's more that. But you're right about the differences of representation as well. I would say that what we call the RP accent was sometimes known as BBC English, I believe, the BBC accent. And, you go back to the 1920s, 1930s, and you hear this, hello and welcome to the BBC. Nobody talks like that anymore. I would love to see somebody who did. I'd love to hear somebody, hello and good afternoon, welcome to Tesco's.
A 10-year-old just be like, hello, chaps. I'm doing jolly well today.
As much as I'd like to tease my son and make him talk like that, it'd be great fun for a day. But no, nobody talks like that. And I think that's, you sometimes, if you're learning that accent, it's not a current accent, whereas the modern RP accent is. And yeah, there's lots of different wonderful accents. Some people have said there's probably about 50 or 60 accents. I don't know exactly how many accents there are. You even go to a single county of somewhere, even Cornwall. One side of Cornwall is completely different to the other Cornwall, and they'll know they'll be able to. Maybe we as outsiders won't pick up on it, but they'll know. Oh, you're from West Cornwall, East Cornwall. It's not that big. It's not that big. The Isle of Wight accent is a beautiful accent that you don't hear as much in the younger population. They've gone for this kind of Mockney accent, if you like. A lot of people talk like straight out of London, and or they'll have kind of that's more the youth of today. Youth of today. I sound like a grand.
You sound really old.
Young people. But so the modern RP accent is slightly different, and I think in terms of newsreaders, a lot of them do edge towards the modern RP accent. Politicians as well, and people doing presentations because it can be quite a clear form of communication. But there's lots of wonderful accents that got brought into the BBC to give a kind of representation, as should be represented. The country should be represented.
No, 100%. And so recently you decided to leave the BBC and do it all on your own. How's that been? Has it been a challenge, and like going away from the nice studio and everything prepared for you? And
you don't like it?
And now you have a wonderful studio. I'm guessing it's your spare room. And it looks fantastic. But when you see the BBC on YouTube, you can see that they're in some kind of studio. Everything's prepared. I guess you have like the newsreaders as well. Has it been a challenge to switch from the BBC to English right now?
Well, yes, but it was time. And I've told you about this earlier. So so I had a really rough, a lot of people had a rough time during the pandemic, and mine was my own story. My wife and son were in Brazil, and I took the job at the BBC. And just as we were sorting the visas, the borders shut down. And I didn't see my wife or child for around 3 years. So my child was 1 year old. He was a 1 year old, not speaking, not doing much. And then I saw him again at 4 years old. Of course, we had Zoom, we had things like that. But I basically spent 3 years of my life in this room. I have a whole house, and this is my house, and I barely left it. I, just had a kind of bed in there and worked in here. And it was really kind of a sort of a bleak existence. It was me and the dog. The dog was from Brazil, ironically enough, got her back.
Okay.
And, so I didn't see my wife for 3 years. And then, we were working from home for about 2 years for the BBC. And what happened is around the same time that they have finally got the visa and came back home, the BBC, we started to go back in. And I really loved going back into the BBC, and it's wonderful. But the draw of being more with my family was really, really important for me. And I think that was a moment that I thought, yeah, you've got the bright lights of the studio and something like that, but it's maybe time to focus on them, that I lost 3 years. I'll never get that 3 years back, but I can take the next 30, hopefully 40, and make the most of it. So all is not lost. If you kind of draw on, if you're only looking back, you're going to get whiplash. I don't know. And so the transition was different because in the sense of, you've got a structured team, which is like, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. Whereas for the first time in years, I mean, I'd done it before. I'd done English. I started English Right Now in 2016, and I did it organically 2019. I started off teaching slang and expressions because my audience were in Brazil. And then when I moved back here and started up again, I changed to pronunciation because predominantly the vast amounts of my audience were actually English-based, UK-based. And I thought a lot of them are going to be moving here, and they're probably going to want to avoid mispronunciations. It's not necessarily about accent reduction. It's about avoiding mispronunciations. It's about saying chip instead of cheap, or the worse ones, I recently taught bitch and beach.
Classic. Everybody always asks. Well. They know what they're doing when they're.
They do. They love it.
Go on, say bitch to me.
I remember there were a couple of comments, and beach has that long e vowel sound, and bitch has that short I vowel sound. And I said, bitch often refers negatively to a person who says bad things. That's it's predominantly, sadly, it's used more for women than males, but it can be used for males, like if they make sort of malicious comments. It can also refer to a difficult situation, like work's a bitch. And I taught all these kind of things. And then, so of course, a couple of people, I think they were British people, said it can also be used to refer to a female dog. And I thought, yeah, I've taught that in previous videos, but nobody panics about mispronouncing the female dog and saying beach. They panic about the bad word. I was like, and I actually thought, how many times my dog is female, so technically she's a bitch. Call her a bitch, yeah, but I never call her that. Not even when I go to the vet. Maybe in a vet they'll go, we've got a bitch, 7 years old, blah blah blah. But I wouldn't go, this is my bitch. Well. Here she is. I'd go, this is my dog. She's 7 years old. She's female. I'd call her a female dog, which is technically not correct. But I think we, at all costs, avoid that word as much as we can. So this is the pronunciation thing I face. But yeah, so the transition in terms of that, it was actually really exciting to be able to do my own thing. Probably the most tricky thing was getting into the habit. I'd say the first video was easy because you have a long time to focus on it. The next 10 were the most difficult ones because you've got less time. You've put your first one out there. You need to make your second one. I do something every single day. So, suddenly you're like, oh my goodness, I've got less time. I need to get this done. I need to get this done. And I was also working for a number of companies on the Isle of Wight doing their social media as well to keep the machine ticking over, to keep the bills paid, the lights on. But it was more about getting things done and getting into that routine. After about 20 days, it just became natural to make a video every day and to get stuff done, to make a YouTube video every week. I've only just started that up recently because I seem to focus more on Instagram first, to work with people who are studying on my course, and getting into that routine. And now I'm in a routine. It's phenomenal. But getting into the routine was probably the toughest thing. Because at the BBC, we had like rotas with do X, Y, and Z this day, do this. And I'm now making the rota for myself. So I need to be disciplined. And I would say that is the toughest transition, to remember that you need to be your own boss and actually be good to yourself as well, because actually you can go two ways. It
can be addictive.
Work yourself silly.
If you are your own boss at the end of the day and you open up hours for conversation classes or whatever, then you think, that's more money. Why shouldn't I teach more hours? But then you do need to set limits for your own sanity.
Well, my wife now works with me full time. She's a copywriter from Brazil. She actually was a really sort of she had a quite good position in Brazil as a copywriter. She had worked for a company out there. She was head of copywriting and digital marketing. And now we work together. And effectively, she's become my manager. So she's more in the money zone. I'm more in that. Let's teach. I love to teach. I love to help people. And she's like, yeah, but we need to do X, Y, and Z. But we could do this. No, you'll burn out. Okay. And it's very much, well, you know this. I think the two words that are the most important in my marriage is yes, dear.
Yeah. Roger
that. Yeah, absolutely. She tells me what to do. And I just enjoy the teaching side. So she's effectively just set me free to do whatever I want to do in terms of teaching, as long as I do what she wants me to do.
It sounds like a good balance, If it works for you and it sounds like it does, then long may it continue.
100%. But you do need to leave. I don't know, for anybody that works with their partner, I think you need to be able to separate. So we very much have time that we work together and time that we do not talk about work, because it can bleed into everything. You sat there with your cereal, your Cocoa Pops, not that I eat Cocoa Pops, but you sat there with your Cocoa Pops and sitting at the table, and suddenly you're like, oh, we need to post this today. We need to do X, Y, and Z. No, leave it to a specific time. Otherwise, it just dominates your life and dominates your thoughts. And I think that's the biggest transitional problem, because you don't have times to finish and start. You are always on the clock if you're not careful.
No, exactly. You said it dominates your life. It dominates your schedule. It takes over your schedule, and then you're going to burn out. You're going to get too tired and you're not going to want to continue. So I think slow and steady is the way to go. And like what they say about learning languages too, you should be learning little and often. And that way making it part of your routine, so that you can make these little baby steps and consistently grow and improve and hopefully become as fluent as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Regular practice. This is what first of all, make sure you're making the sound correctly. Make sure you're doing that, that thing, and then practice it. This is what I say. This is a great little thing for you. So pronunciation, I often compare it to going to the gym. So it's different to grammar. It's different to vocabulary. Vocabulary, just fix it in your mind. You can learn 6 words per hour. I would say most students have the capacity to remember. You can learn 10, probably fix about 6 in your mind, and that's it. But with pronunciation, it's slightly different, because you're actually training the muscles. It is exactly like going to the gym. You're doing things that are completely unnatural with your mouth for some people. Like, not a lot of languages have that sound. Not a lot of languages understand that you need to put another one is the woo, like as in word, the starting, like we often say w, but it's woo. A lot of them have a similar sound, but they'll get their teeth involved. So it becomes like w, and it's wrong. Or they will open their mouth too much, wah, and it's not right. So as soon as you get that sound, train your mouth to do what you want. And I often hear students, how many times do I need to practice? Well, the first time you went to the gym, it wasn't a great experience, right? Your muscles are weak. I've started going to the gym again. I'm on this trail. Your muscles are weak. You can't bench. You can't do anything. You think, you're going for the 70, 80 kilos and you go, oh, no. We need to bring it down to 10. But over time, if you build the muscles, you strengthen the muscles, it becomes more natural. And of course, you're building those connections in your brain, the neural pathways to really kind of work out, make them more natural. And over time, it does. But it's a series of practice. Make sure you're doing it right. Get that exercise right on the barbell. You're lifting it down here, you're going to break your rib cage probably. You're lifting it up here, you're going to break your arms or your shoulders. So if you've got it here, like when you're benching, are we doing an exercise class? We are, aren't we?
Yeah, this is what it's going to turn into. If you want, we can
gym with Lewis.
Start working out.
Gym club with Lewis and Roy.
What?
You're
Arms
a pro.
up.
You're a pro. We'll do dance class later on. But like, if you're putting the bar in the wrong position, you're going to cause yourself problems and probably strengthen the wrong areas. If you're bending your wrists, it's little things like that. And it's exactly the same with pronunciation. If you are mispronouncing things over and over again, you're fossilizing a mistake. And over time, it becomes more difficult. So you need to almost break that habit. It's completely different to grammar in that sense. You are going to the gym in your mouth. And I say, stand in front of a mirror, make sure you're practicing. Use your phone, record yourself, listen back. If it doesn't sound right, There's lots of different things I talk about how to really make the most of the knowledge that you gain. But there you go.
And going to the gym with your pronunciation in front of the mirror, working out day and night.
You know what? I've as we get older and children get more energetic in my life, my 6-year-old is running around the house like constant chaos. And, as we get older, we have a capacity to lose energy. So I've been joking about this for years about not joking, but comparing pronunciation to going to the gym. And I finally the other day said, right, I'm going to join a gym. So I made a series of stories like I'm practicing what I preach. I am going to the gym. I'm not learning pronunciation, but I am learning how to improve my body. And it's a long slog. I have a guy, he's a personal trainer, but it's included in the gym package. So it sounds more, posh than it is, I suppose.
Yeah.
But he comes up with the cliches. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but he's absolutely on the money. He's absolutely right. On the money. Those are exactly right. He's absolutely 100% correct. It is a marathon, not a sprint. If I could lift 80 kilos today on one arm, I'd be done. I go out, ripped.
Yeah.
Absolutely
buffed up.
Absolutely, a lot. I'd be like Arnold Schwarzenegger in one day. That would be great. It'd be the USB stick of my life done, but it doesn't work like that. It's about diet. It's about everything. And it's the same with pronunciation. It's about input. It's about practice. It's about where your source of input comes from. If you need a teacher, a lot of people, they do, it's helpful to have that trainer the same way I have the gym trainer, because if you can't necessarily learn English by osmosis. Pronunciation is not going to happen. There you go.
100%. This is something that everyone can take away and think that it is little and often. You need to think that pronunciation and learning a language is like working out and going to a gym. You are training, and it is a marathon, not a sprint. You cannot start off with loads of energy and then give up within a week, because then you're not going to learn anything. If you're trying to improve your English, you need to be aware that this is going to be a lifelong thing, that you're going to have to incorporate English in your life for the rest of your life, whether that's with podcasts, whether that's with chatting to a friend, whether that's speaking to your mirror. But it needs to be something you enjoy, and you're going to have to stay on top of it for a long time, because if not, it's going to get rusty. You're going to have to brush up on what you used to know and keep practicing your pronunciations. This is a message to everybody that enjoy it. Don't give up. Take it easy. Practice. Try and train your pronunciation. And on that note, if anyone has any doubts for either myself or Roy, please let us know in the comments. Personally, I think we could continue chatting for the next hour or two. I haven't asked you anything related to Brazil or your chefing days, your favorite idioms, your slang, your experiences around the UK. So maybe we'll have to get a round two in the
round two would be great.
Because I'm afraid we are running out of time. I've got a dash. I've got a run. So Roy, it's been an absolute pleasure. You see, it was
all mine. It's been all my pleasure. Well, I've been honoured to be here, and I was honoured for you to ask me to be here. So thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. So thank you, Roy. Thank you, everybody, for watching or listening. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Ta-ra!
Bye.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and see you next time.